This is Winnipeg's castle, also known as the Fort Garry Hotel, and in this video I'm spending one night at one of Canada's most special and most haunted hotels. I'll take you on a trip through time, from a 75-year battle for passenger rail service supremacy in Winnipeg, to the incredible stories that led to the completion of the hotel. It's Manitoba's only remaining Grand Railway Hotel, and it's located in my birthplace here in Winnipeg. This is the Fort Garry Hotel. Let's begin. Now, I'm going to spend 24 hours inside the Fort Garry Hotel with my mom to celebrate her 62nd birthday coming up, but the story of this hotel dates back well over a century ago. So let's head back in time to the summer of 1904. The Canadian Pacific Railway had just trekked west through the prairies and into Winnipeg in 1882, and this is important because it was at the time the closest settlement east of the Rocky Mountains, earning the nickname the Gateway to the West. And in June of 1904, Canadian Pacific began construction on a passenger station that would reflect the city's importance, and in May of 1905, Canadian Pacific's new station was complete. They settled on attaching a hotel to the station at the corner of Higgins and Main, despite surveying the area with the city of Winnipeg, where not a single person thought it was a location that was a good idea for a luxury hotel, and it was much like today, where almost 120 years later, the location is home to a huge homeless population, high crime. Despite this, the Canadian Pacific decided the hotel and the station would draw growth into the location, and 1 year later, on July 19th of 1906, Canadian Pacific completed their first Grand Railway Hotel in the Prairies, the Royal Alexandra Hotel, and it was a drastically different build than their previous chateau-style hotels, with the Alexandra being essentially a simple box with a red brick finish. Now, the Grand Railway Hotels were a tool of the Canadian Pacific Railway to attract wealthy travelers across Canada, from the Banff Springs Hotel, which opened in 1888, to the Palliser Hotel in Calgary that opened in 1914, and the Royal Alexandra opening here in 1906. And it was deemed the most luxurious of all the railway hotels of her time. But, like any good story, there has to be an antagonist. And in 1902, the Grand Trunk Pacific Railway's president, Charles Melville Hayes, this guy, wanted to forge a transcontinental railway of his own from Winnipeg west to the Pacific Ocean, and by 1908, Grand Trunk had made it into Winnipeg. Now, this was Canadian Pacific's biggest competitor, and they began construction on a passenger station of their own in 1909. Winnipeg's Union Station would open, and on peak days, it would see up to 10,000 passengers walk through the doors every day in the 1910s. I mean, this was the third largest city in all of North America at the time. And it's also worth noting, too, the Winnipeg Union Station was positioned only 2 kilometers to the south of Canadian Pacific's, as you see here on the screen. In 1911, the Grand Trunk Railway decided they needed to build a luxury hotel of their own instead of sending their passengers over to Canadian Pacific's hotel. So in 1911, they broke ground on the newest addition to Canada's Grand Railway Hotels, and the second in Winnipeg. This was a chateau-style hotel, originally named the Selkirk Hotel, named after the Selkirk settlers, which we'll discuss a bit more later on. However, the name was later changed before opening to the Fort Garry Hotel in honor of the Fort Garry settlement here in the heart of downtown Winnipeg. And although Grand Trunk President Charles Melville Hayes had envisioned an ocean-to-ocean railway with a stop at the Fort Garry Hotel on the way, he never saw the completion of either, because in 1912 he was on his way back from Europe to secure more funding to complete his railway from Jasper west into Prince Rupert and turn it into essentially what Vancouver has become today. However, on the voyage over the Atlantic to attend the grand opening of the Grand Trunk's first Grand Railway Hotel, the Chateau Laurier in Ottawa, Chucky Hayes had met his fate on the Titanic, where he would go down with the world's biggest ocean liner of the day. Despite the loss of their visionary behind it, the Fort Garry Hotel would open its doors in December of 1913 at 14 stories high and most infamous for its incredibly steep copper pitch roof, and its simple design with the chateau top really complemented the flat prairies around it. The Fort Garry Hotel was the tallest building in the city at the time, and Winnipeg's first skyscraper, which is kind of weird to think about today because it absolutely dwarfs in comparison to the rest of today's skyline, but back then, it was the city's crown jewel, as you see here on the screen. And the Fort Garry even had a tunnel underneath, connecting it to Union Station, the same way the Royal Alexandra connected to the Canadian Pacific Station, so that the wealthiest of passengers would not have to walk outside in the frigid winter cold, because at the dawn of the 20th century, Winnipeg was believed to be the coldest city on the planet at that time. The Grand Trunk Pacific even opened up the Hotel Macdonald in Edmonton 2 years later in 1915, which was the next settlement west of Winnipeg for them, and the Macdonald was actually modeled after the Fort Garry Hotel. Don't worry, I have a separate video coming up on the Hotel Macdonald in this series. After the Fort Garry opened, the Royal Alexandra Hotel was very quickly seen as the inferior of the two Grand Railway hotels, compared to the grandeur and the elegance of the Fort Garry, which is still evident today. But unfortunately in 1919, the Grand Trunk Railway would go bankrupt and merge with the other Canadian government railways to form the new Canadian National, or as most people know it today, CN. The Fort Garry would become a Canadian National Hotel, and Winnipeg's Union Station would now become a Canadian National Station as well. But fast forward 3 decades to 1955, Canadian Pacific had just made a huge investment into a new flagship passenger fleet, the Canadian. This was a stainless steel consist with scenic dome viewing areas on top of the train, heading west from Montreal at Windsor Station, into Winnipeg at the Canadian Pacific Station on Higgins Avenue here, west through Calgary outside the Palliser Hotel, into the heart of the Canadian Rocky Mountains past the Continental Divide, and finally arriving in Vancouver at Waterfront Station. And this is important because this was Canada's most luxurious train at that time. But by the late 1960s, passenger rail travel was declining to the point where the Royal Alexandra Hotel was mainly vacant and the station next door often sat empty. By this time, the Canadian Pacific Railway wanted to exit the passenger service industry altogether because it had become increasingly unprofitable, and in late 1967, the Royal Alexandra Hotel closed its doors for good, sitting empty for about 4 years until late 1971, where it was finally demolished, putting an end to a over 50-year battle for the Grand Railway Hotel supremacy in this city. And Canadian Pacific did not stop there, as they would continue service of the Canadian until 1978, when Canadian Pacific and Canadian National would consolidate all their passenger services into what we now know today as Via Rail, and on October 30th of 1978, the final Canadian Pacific passenger train would arrive in Winnipeg at the Canadian Pacific Station, and shortly after that, the station was sold for $1 to the Manitoba Métis Federation, with all Via Rail service moving over to the Canadian National passenger station on Main and Broadway, Winnipeg Union Station, which they would also then sell for $1 to the Canadian government for the use of Via Rail, making the Fort Garry the only Grand Railway hotel for both the northern route to Edmonton and Jasper that it has served since 1913, as well as the southern Canadian Pacific route heading to Calgary and Banff. And ridership through Winnipeg Union Station would triple the following year, but in 1987, the Fort Garry Hotel was seized by the city of Winnipeg for unpaid taxes.
Good evening. Out front tonight, the Fort Garry Hotel is still standing, but right now, that's about all.
And sold for $1 million in 1988 to a private company on the promise of spending $12 million in renovations to upgrade the 75-year-old hotel. Because in 1990, the Canadian government cut passenger route service heading west from Thunder Bay through the Prairies into Calgary to the Rockies and Banff and Lake Louise for good, reducing ridership the following year by over 70%, and in fear of financial problems ahead, the Fort Garry was sold again in 1990 to today's owners, and almost 35 years later, today's Winnipeg Union Station only sees the Canadian depart twice a week in both eastbound directions for Toronto and westbound for Vancouver, compared to twice daily in both directions in 1989. And although across the street the Fort Garry Hotel has become relatively buried in the skyline by the apartments behind it compared to years past, this is where we turn the page from past to present, 111 years after the grand opening of Winnipeg's Chateau Castle, and my experience here at the former Grand Trunk Crown Jewel today in 2024. Now, I live in Vancouver, so this journey starts with a flight from Vancouver over the Canadian Rockies and into the prairies of Manitoba, and the next morning my mom and I headed downtown to the Forks for check-in at the Fort Garry, and upon walking in, you'll be amazed with this larger-than-life grand lobby, which from what I found online seems almost untouched since opening day in December of 1913. Like, just think of all the names that have walked through here way before us. Now, Mom and I headed up to the 6th floor for our room, but our view was a bit of a concrete jungle on the back of the hotel, and upon asking the front desk, they were super nice and changed us to a room with a much better view. Oh, much better. Look at this. Awesome. Not to mention, a little bit of a surprise. Happy birthday, Mom.
Thanks.
Happy birthday.
Oh.
Now, this is a vacation for me and a bit of a staycation for my mom, and as much as she's going to hate that I'm promoting this, she is turning 62 this weekend, and this was my present and my thank you to her. So we headed down Broadway towards Winnipeg Union Station for this new cafe that just opened up in the station called Sunny Day Cafe. My mom and I got our caffeine fix, and after that, we would head down to the Forks. Now, the Forks are super important to this story because it's the meeting of the Red and the Assiniboine River, but more importantly, it was the home of the Manitoba Métis and the Selkirk settlers, because in 1812, the Selkirk settlers and my Métis ancestors set up a trading post here, originally supposed to be an hour north in Selkirk, Manitoba, where they decided last minute to reroute directly south for better mobility with access to the rivers, hence the settlers from Selkirk. And they would set up here at the Forks for a new settlement called Upper Fort Garry, with Lower Fort Garry being about an hour north just outside Selkirk. And this is why the railway was stationed here. It's why Winnipeg Union Station exists, and ultimately why the Fort Garry was built. And although I do think the Selkirk Hotel had a bit of a better ring to it than the Fort Garry, hey, choice is the spice of life. And this is the spot to be at in the summer. From great restaurants to hot weather and plenty of activities to do, the Forks is an amazing spot, even if it's just for a cup of coffee with your mom for her 62nd birthday. And after that, we headed back down Broadway to the hotel, and we did a little bit of exploring, wondering which pieces of furniture were recent and which might have been from 1913. We really didn't find the answers to our questions, but after that, I had another surprise for my mom, and it was at the hotel spa. A massage with some incredible views from the top of the hotel, and while she was getting her massage, I went to check out the hotel's gym, and first thing I noticed was this awesome complimentary fridge of Dasani's, I don't know what they call them, the water bottles, and fresh apples. And they actually had a decent selection of equipment in the gym, and I know a few people are going to ask, where is the ceremonious cannonball in the pool? Well, the Fort Garry does not have a pool or a hot tub in the hotel, but hey, hopefully one day they'll get one. And after that, I headed upstairs to shower up for dinner. Now, the Fort Garry actually has 3 restaurants inside the hotel, 2 of which are closed today, and the first of which is the Sunset Terrace, which is essentially some outdoor turf on the hotel's driveway for an outdoor patio in the summer. I don't really know how else to describe it, but you can kind of see it from the visual on the screen. The Fort Garry also has a 3rd restaurant, the Oval Room, and this is the true culinary crown jewel here at the hotel. And although it's seen quite a few changes over the years, they recently renovated it, or pardon me, I should say they recently unrenovated it to its original 1913 look, style, and design. And wow, when you walk in, it is jaw-dropping in here. And although the fireplace in Calgary at the Palliser Hotel that has stood since 1914 was absolutely stunning, the Oval Room of the Fort Garry really brought me back to 1913. But, as my dad used to tell me as a kid, I didn't come here to make friends and enjoy the scenery, I came here to eat. And for starters, my mom and I decided to go with the pan-seared scallops. Cooked perfectly, with an incredible crust on them, and this pea puree may be my new favorite way to eat peas. For entrees though, the Fort Garry has had this incredible 24-hour braised beef chuck on the menu since 1992. And although I was worried that this may come out kind of like old people food, it was very clear that this braised beef has, much like the hotel, absolutely stood the test of time. The reduction sauce, the potato puree, the fresh seasonal chef choice veg, all of it was great, but the beef was one of the best slow-cooked dishes I've ever had in my life, especially considering my mom got the meatloaf, which was definitely good, and I tried it, and it was a very tasty meatloaf, but I prefer the braised beef chuck a little bit more. And then for dessert to finish, my mom and I both got the carrot cake cheesecake, which is basically a 50-50 split carrot cake and cheesecake, although I will say the carrot cake portion was pretty dry. The cheesecake was really good. The presentation, the candles, and the happy birthday wishes on my mom's plate were awesome. The candied pecans and the creme anglaise, which was house-made by the way, were absolutely outstanding. And as far as I'm concerned, this dinner service was just short of perfectly executed by the kitchen staff. You guys did an amazing job, and after a few coffees later, and a bit of a food coma to walk off because my mom does give me her leftovers, it was off to bed. Now the next morning, I got up early at 5 a.m. to catch the sunrise. Living in Vancouver, the sunsets are great, but the Prairie sunrises just cannot be beat in Winnipeg. There's something just so calming and so peaceful that I love about a Prairie sunrise. And as the sunrise is over Winnipeg Union Station and the Museum for Human Rights, I'm imagining how cool this must have been and what it would have felt like in the 1950s at the peak of passenger rail travel, or in December of 1913 when the hotel first opened. After sunrise, I got back to the hotel room and we ordered some room service coffee. Now the pots are a bit smaller than you'll get at some of the other Grand Railway hotels, but hey, that morning caffeine hits just the same, and it was very much needed after our sleep from last night, which, if I had any negatives to share about my experience, it would be the rooms. The air conditioning didn't work and it got super hot at night, so I ended up opening the one bathroom window because you can't open up the main windows, but once you do that, all you hear is the noise of CN freight trains passing by all night. Although it did make it very difficult to sleep, I kind of liked it, because that's a part of the experience. And if you're going to compare the Fort Garry to the other Grand Railway hotels, yes, the Fort Garry is a 3-star hotel and the other Grand Railway hotels are 4 stars, with a few being 5 stars, but at $150 a night compared to $500 or in some cases $1,000 a night at the other Grand Railway hotels in Canada, this is your cheapest ticket to ride for a piece of Canadian history. And let's be honest, I didn't book this trip for the greatest night's sleep or a comfy bed. It was to experience a hotel that helped connect Canada to reach the West and the Pacific Ocean. And I mean, they even have a mail slot in the main lobby that guests in 1913 would use to write letters to their loved ones, which you can still use today. And if that isn't cool, I don't know what is. Now, the Fort Garry was bought by Choice Hotels in 2020, and they have made quite a few changes to align with being more cost effective. And if I had one critique, it's that they got to bring back the Sunday morning breakfast buffet that they used to do, because I actually used to do some freelance work for the hotel a few years ago, and they'd always let me eat for free at the buffets, and it was outstanding. But even with that portion considered, this was a great experience at the Fort Garry, from the jaw-dropping interiors that have stood for well over a century, to the near-perfect culinary experience and the customer service, changing our room upon check-in, and even giving Mom and I 2 free drink vouchers for the inconvenience. And I also know people are going to ask if I don't mention this, Room 202, rumored to be the most haunted hotel room, and the Fort Garry being the most haunted hotel in Canada. I'll just leave it at, if you believe in ghosts, I think you'll find what you're looking for. If you don't, I think you're gonna have a good night's sleep because the front desk does have a bit of a brochure outlining the whole process of the hotel being haunted. Anyway, let me know in the comment section what you think. I have my theories, but I'm curious what you think. Now, a word from today's video sponsor, Manscaped.com. The team at Manscaped has introduced their brand new Lawnmower 5 for 2024 for all your below-the-belt grooming, and coupled with their Beard Hedger will get you absolutely dialed in this season for a glow-up like never before. I use the Beard Hedger's 20 trim lengths, 60-minute battery life, and waterproof design every week to taper and fade my beard in between appointments with my barber, and my Lawnmower 5.0 keeps me prepared to perform for all my date nights, and you can too when you use the code TRAVSUCKS20 for 20% off and free shipping when you click on that first link in the video description, only at manscaped.com. And thank you again, Manscaped, for sponsoring this video. This is just one stop in my series across Canada sharing the stories of the Grand Railway hotels from a century ago, and ultimately my thank you and my love letter to the countless men that put it all on the line to build this railway, the railway hotels, and physically tie together Canada, coast to coast, Atlantic to Pacific. If you enjoyed this video, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss my other stops along the way. My mom and I are heading out to the Fort Garry Hotel, out of Winnipeg. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.